Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's session, Grief, Loss and Bereavement Counselling for Young People. My name is Sydney Cruikshank and I'm from the PHN Education team. I'm joined today by my colleagues Sandy Vincent and Daniel Reynolds, as well as our presenter, Dr. Elizabeth Mann from the National Centre for Childhood Grief. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I live and work on. For me, that is Darkinjung land. I'd also like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. A few things to let you know about this session. It will be recorded and available for you to view in our PHN Education Library, along with a copy of the presentation slides in a few days' time. As attendees, your camera and microphone are automatically disabled. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please send these through the question box, which you will find located in your control panel. These will be answered at the end of the presentation. An evaluation will also come to you directly after this session. Your feedback is extremely important for us as it enables us to provide future educational sessions. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Mann from the National Centre for Childhood Grief.
Thank you so much, Sydney. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome everyone. I'm looking forward to our half an hour together. Just a little bit about my history. I was a GP for nearly 20 years in Sydney. And then very unexpectedly became interested in palliative care and particularly in grief. And I realised that I actually wasn't that comfortable talking to people about grief, and I hadn't learnt much about it in my medical training. And so I ended up at the NCCG doing some training and never ever imagined that I would change career path. So here I am. I absolutely love my work. So today I'm going to start by asking Sydney to just play a very short 2-minute video to really introduce our work and what we do. Thanks, Sydney.
My dad's name is Robert.
My mum's name is Alison.
My dad's name is Paul.
What I love about my mum is I come down before school in the morning and she makes me breakfast and she makes the best omelettes.
My mum's name is Anna and my dad's name is John.
My dad's name is Doug.
My favourite thing to do with my dad is go to his work, and he has his own office and a workshop and cars out the front.
What I like to do with my dad is cooking and just hanging out with him.
My favourite thing to do with my dad is to go out the back of our house and pick the vegetables and fruit that we grow.
Jump into bed with them at night, spend time with them and always give them hugs.
My mum died Christmas Eve of 2010.
My dad died around Christmas time in 2009.
My dad died in 2009.
Dad died on the 26th of October 2007.
My dad passed away in 2005 and then my mum passed away in 2009.
I like coming to a friend's place because you get a level of support there that you can't get anywhere else.
I like that we can come together and feel the same way about something.
I love going to friends' place because I can talk about my dad and everyone knows how I feel, and I don't have to be sad all the time.
Having people there that understand what you've been through.
The best thing about going to the friend's place is I don't have to be nervous about speaking about my dad.
Thanks, Sydney. I've watched that little video probably thousands of times, and each time it still makes me feel a little bit teary. I know all of those children who are now young adults. One of the girls has actually become one of our support workers in one of our groups at the centre. So I still get to see her, and she's grown into a very capable, lovely young woman. So it's lovely for me to watch that again.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Look, I'm really thrilled to be able to spend this time talking to GPs in particular. We do a lot of teaching across the health profession, but I just wish that in the 20 years that I was a GP that I had known about our centre. It was actually around then, but I didn't know about it. And I still remember families that would have benefited very much from our service. So I'm just delighted to be able to share with you a little bit about what we do. Next slide, thanks, Sydney. This is really a historical photo, but I put it in here because up until November this year, this was our home. So we were in this little home in Eastwood in Sydney, and we'd been there for 23 years. So as you can see, a pretty ordinary little house, but a very welcoming sort of home away from home for families that were hurting. And our next slide. This is our new home, very exciting for us. We have moved to Hornsby. It is an old medical centre, but we are in the process of revamping it. We have totally done the bottom floor already, and we've turned it into a very child-friendly, warm, welcoming place. And it's quite close to Hornsby Hospital, but handy to people who are coming down from the north as well. So that's where we're based. And next slide. Just a little bit about us. We have been around since 1994. We were established by Mal and Di McKissick, our founders, who are world-renowned in the bereavement world, certainly experts in children's bereavement, and they have written all the textbooks about children's bereavement. Mal and Di are still around. They've retired officially, but still support our centre very much. We provide care for children from the age of 3 through to 17 years. We do see anyone older than that as well, but there is a fee for service for those people. We also provide group counselling and individual counselling, and we also, very importantly, provide support for families where someone has been diagnosed with a terminal illness. So the person doesn't have to have died for them to come to our centre. And it's really one of the most poignant sort of moments when we have young families. Most of the families we see are young families where perhaps one of the parents has been diagnosed with a very serious illness. And in their distress, the family find us and come along, and it's like the parent that's dying is so comforted to know that we exist and that we are this caring place who will be there for their children and their partner after they have died. So, I mean, it's a very moving kind of situation, but can provide enormous comfort. And we do provide counselling for the person who's dying, as well as the family during and after the death. Thanks, Sydney. Next slide. So our vision. We are a community which accepts there is no right or wrong way for children to grieve, and that grief is a normal and ongoing process, which with compassionate support, children can accommodate into their lives as they become adults. And our purpose is to provide the very best possible care for grieving children, their families and support networks, and to enhance their opportunity to live a full and meaningful life. And I think what we know is that if a child or a young person or anyone actually experiences the death of someone very close to them, it is a life-changing event. But what we don't want to happen is for that event to define that child's life forever. we know that grief will be with them forever, but if we can provide the best possible support so that they can go on to, you know, live a full and wonderful life, that's our goal. Thanks, Sydney. I show this slide because I really feel that in Australia 2022, we still don't do death and grief very well. I think we're uncomfortable generally as a society with big emotions and with grief. And I think in the medical profession, we do it a lot better than other professions, but I think we can still improve on it. And I certainly know from all the training we do for social workers and psychologists and other health professionals, very few of us are really comfortable with grief. And I think, you know, we don't even like to use the word dead or death. You know, we say passed away or use some other euphemism, you know, lost your mother, that type of language. So I think that it's really helpful if we can find professionals who are experienced and comfortable talking about this, which is what our team does all the time. This is all we do, so we get very experienced at it and very good at it. Thank you. Next slide. I show this little cartoon because, and it always makes me smile. I think that, you know, as medical professionals, you know, it's our job to diagnose people, and I think we can be very quick to diagnose, and certainly a lot of people want to sort of slap a label on grieving people pretty quickly. But what we know, this little koala, when he's had his whole forest cut down, he's having a very normal, understandable, but huge reaction to what has happened. And I think that's a great analogy for grief. You know, grief is when something huge, absolutely huge and painful and almost unbearable has happened to someone. They have an understandably huge, almost overwhelming reaction to it at times. And, you know, that's what we're here for, to help them to work through that. Thanks, Sydney. Just back one. Yeah, so I think when I say that as a society we don't understand grief well, I think if we start to talk about children, it's even more true. I think that generally we don't like to think that really little children feel the pain of grief that we feel as adults. You know, I think we like to think that if they're little, they don't really understand what's happening. Perhaps they don't feel that intense pain. And what we know is that they absolutely do feel that pain, but it presents very differently at different ages and different developmental stages. And so that it's important that we really understand the child and where they're at and what they're going through to provide the best possible support for them. Next slide. I think what most people equate grief to is crying, and we have some rules in our groups, and one of the rules is that it's okay to cry and it's okay not to cry. It's actually fairly unusual for children to show a lot of tears at our centre, or generally children tend not to cry as much about their grief as adults do. It's certainly their biggest fear. The kids that come to our centre say the worst thing that could possibly happen would be for them to cry when they're at school and for their friends to see them crying. So I think that is one of the things that makes people think that children aren't really feeling the pain of grief, because often they're not showing their tears. Next slide. So we probably see a lot more of little children like this than we do of that previous slide. You know, when we're grieving, we have a lot of big emotions, and children have a lot of big mixed emotions as well. And anger is one very, very common one. So we see a lot of very, very angry little boys and girls at the centre. And even this morning, I've been contacted by a school counsellor. A child has been being bullied, but also being, you know, violent in the playground and punching a few other kids. And he's just, you know, his dad died only a few weeks ago, and that's not unexpected for us. He's got these huge, big feelings, and he's just lashing out at people. And so we need to help him manage his anger. Yeah, thanks, Sydney. Next slide. Yeah, another really big common emotion for children is guilt, especially if the death has been by suicide, which we see a lot of, but it can be after any death. Kids, because they don't really understand death terribly well when they're young, often they think, I've done something, it's my fault, somehow something I've done, or, you know, I wasn't enough or I wasn't good enough. So they carry huge feelings of guilt, and we often need to work with them to help them to understand their grief better. Next slide, thanks. And this is another poorly understood phenomenon that we see every single day. It's a universal thing, actually, that all of us, when we're grieving, become regressed. And what we mean by that is that we feel on the inside much more vulnerable, much younger than our biological age. And it's really obvious in children. So little children may regress to bedwetting and thumb sucking and those sort of obvious behaviours. But children will describe, older children will describe on the inside how they're feeling, and they feel much, much younger. And we work a lot with school counsellors and teachers to help them to understand why children are behaving the way they're behaving and how they're feeling and how they need to be cared for and supported in their grief. Thank you. Next slide. So just very briefly, a couple of case studies, and these are just a couple of examples, literally 2 of the families I just saw last week, because we are just seeing hundreds of families and hundreds of children who are bereaved. But just to give you an idea of the sorts of families that we're seeing, obviously I've changed the names, but the stories are true. The first young woman, a young mum, Natalie, that I've been seeing, her husband died from suicide a couple of months ago. He hung himself in a public place. So when the police came to the house, her children were asleep, so she didn't need to tell the children straight away. So she waited until you know, the early morning when the children woke up, and she just told them that Daddy had died, but she didn't know how to tell them about what had happened. So wisely, she did a bit of Googling and found us and rang me, and I could talk to her about that. And we actually waited a little while. I supported her through the funeral. Her children are quite young. And she then came in and brought the children in, and we had a session, at what we call a family session. I had one of our children's counsellors with us, and I could talk to the children. We very much believe in truth and inclusion, that children need access to the truth, but in a an age-appropriate, loving, caring way. So we could have that very difficult conversation with her children, and her children are now being seen at the centre. They each have their own counsellor, and I'm continuing to see Natalie, and will do so for quite some time, I believe. And then Jack is a little 7-year-old, a lovely little guy that we're seeing at the moment. His little sister died from an asthma attack about 6 months ago now, I think, but they were home with a babysitter, and you know, it just all happened very quickly, and very sadly she wasn't able to survive. But what we've seen in this family is very, very typical. So what we know is that people become exaggerated versions of who they are. So the mum and the dad are hugely struggling, understandably. It's a terrible situation. The dad had a pre-existing drug and alcohol problem, and he really has gone right off the rails. The mum is, doing her best, but absolutely hemorrhaging from her grief. But fortunately, they found us, and little Jack, his best friend has died. He and his little sister were just so close. And he is devastated, but he's trying to be the grown-up in the family because he can see that mum and dad are just struggling so much. So we're able to support each of them. We're seeing each of them individually. We have Jack in a sibling group so he can meet a few other kids. And the mum has joined. While we run our groups, we run a support group for parents as well, so she's able to access that. So we really believe in providing support for the whole family. We see grandparents and aunties and whoever is needing support, we are prepared to see them. And then our last slide. Thanks, Sydney. So how to access our service? People just need to ring us up. We don't need a mental health care plan. It's a self-referral thing. And it's very exciting for us because we have this partnership with the PHN in your area. So we are providing all the counselling for adults, carers and children, free and unlimited. And that's just a wonderful, wonderful thing that we can do. We also provide email support service for anybody. So for health professionals like yourselves, it's actually still run by Di McKissick in her retirement. So it's a fantastic service. The woman who's written the textbooks will answer your questions. So if you have a family you're concerned about, you can email Di and she will get back to you. But you can also give her email address to families that you're worried about or who need support. And I encourage you to get onto our website and have a look at our education courses, because I wish I'd done one of these courses when I was practicing in general practice. It's just incredibly helpful information. So yeah, I think we might open it up to any questions for the last few minutes. Thanks, Sydney.
Thanks for that, Liz. Wow, those case studies, they really pull and make it really real, don't they? Yeah. Now, questions that came in today, we actually have not had any questions from anyone. So if there's anything else that yourself or Dan would like to add before we wrap up, I'll leave it to you guys.
Great. I just want to say, look, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I know that, in busy general practice, that caring for people that are hurting and really, really hurting from the pain of grief, we just don't have time in general practice. So I think knowing that there's a service like ours that can provide this ongoing support for as long as people need it is just really helpful. And I should have said we provide online as well as face-to-face counselling. So we're doing lots and lots of online counselling. So and that works. It's very effective. So we can offer that as well. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
That's all I was going to add in, was the telehealth side of things. So the service is available across our region for that for those age groups. We've had a great partnership with Liz and NCCG, especially when it comes to support for people after a death by suicide, and especially of young people. We know it's a tough time for young people during that age group. So yeah, it's been great.
Great.
Well, thank you everyone for attending today. And just a reminder, the survey will be to you shortly. If you can please fill it in for us, that would be wonderful. And again, the slides and the video will be up in our education library in a few days' time. Thank you all for attending. Thanks, Liz. Thanks Dan.
Thank you. Bye.